Welcome back to the Michigan Business Beat, brought to you on the Michigan Business Network. Chris Holman coming to you from our studios at the Capital Region International Airport. And we're going to kind of stay in town right now, right here in Lansing. Amanda Dernovshek is going to join us, and she is an associate with Foster Swift Collins and Smith, PCs, a wonderful law firm with 6 offices across the state. And Amanda, it's always good to have you back on. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me, Chris.
You got through Thanksgiving. That's a good thing. And
Yep.
and now we're looking at Christmas. So a little
Yep.
bit of time spent there. But you're spending a lot of time on something we want to talk about, and that's the CTA. So explain to everybody what that is and what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Corporate Transparency Act is a piece of legislation that became effective this year and essentially requires companies to report their beneficial owners. So the last about 9 days have been pretty exciting with respect to the CTA because there was a court in Texas last week that issued a nationwide injunction, essentially saying that the Corporate Transparency Act was unconstitutional. Um, so if you followed any of the court cases, there's probably been about a dozen or so this year that have been percolating, and the plaintiffs in those cases have argued a number of things, saying that the CTA is unconstitutional because it's an overreach of Congress's power. It infringes upon states' rights, it infringes upon individuals' rights, and it violates a whole host of different amendments that we have as individuals in the U.S. So last week on Tuesday, the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas granted the nationwide injunction. And you're probably thinking, well, what does that mean? That sounds like a legal word that I'm not really familiar with. What that means is for now, there is no longer a requirement to make those filings that were required 2 weeks ago. So this injunction basically tells the federal government that they cannot enforce the Corporate Transparency Act unless and until something else happens. So the nationwide injunction is in place and it will remain in place for some time. I did just confirm, though, this morning that the government did appeal that injunction. They filed an appeal on, I believe, December 6th. So, they're challenging that and they're saying, no, we want this to be in place and we want this to continue. We want companies to have to report their beneficial owners. But as of right now, today, there's no requirement to continue those reporting obligations. And there's a huge deadline coming up at the end of this month. So a lot of businesses are probably feeling a bit relieved, but I would say stay on standby for more information coming.
Yeah, well, this is really interesting because the hardship it'll cause for businesses and just the reporting part of it. As I remember, initially it went under the guise of we want to make sure there isn't money laundering,
Right. Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Who really pushed this legislation to begin with?
Well, this was put into place about 4 years ago, and it was kind of part of a larger bill. You know how Congress does, they'll kind of slip something into a bigger package of legislation. And the Department of Treasuries was pushing this. They wanted to have access to more information about companies and who owns companies. They did, you're right, push this through under the guise of we want to address money laundering and we want to find criminals who have shell companies. And so that's kind of what they've hung their hat on all along, these few
Yeah,
years. But a lot of people are, I would say, skeptical about that purpose and whether that's true or untrue. So
might be one of those people. So, so what happens now? This thing going to be knocked out in court for the next 2 years, or
So, unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball to say for absolute certainty what's going to happen, but the injunction was issued. The government appealed that injunction last week. So now there's going to be another court that's going to review that decision. And basically, they're going to analyze what this judge said about the CTA and determine whether they agree with it. That appeal is probably going to take some time. And so I think for businesses, they should just kind of hang out and wait to see what's going to happen. There is a chance, though, that when the new administration comes into office next year, they may just say, don't worry about it. You can withdraw the appeal. But we can't say that for certain. So we're kind of in a holding pattern here for now. Just sit back, relax. There's no reporting requirement as of today.
well, it's interesting because that's exactly what I was going to say. That after mid-January,
Mhm.
this whole landscape is going to change.
Yeah.
and you'll probably just see that thing go away. That's my guess.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know you can't guess at that, but so would the advice be, hang in there. You don't have to report at this point, but make sure you're ready to report if things get reversed.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that that's kind of what we're telling clients. There's no obligation to report right now. We'll let you know if that changes. Um, I don't view that as being a real possibility, but before the end of the year, though. So for people who are really concerned about meeting that January 1 deadline, the current report right now is only voluntary. It's not required.
It's kind of interesting because when this first came out, we looked at it in the business community and thought, this is so absurd. There's no way this will ever get anywhere. And then all of a sudden, it's like a hot issue here in the lame duck session.
Mhm. Yep. And we got to the 11th hour and here comes this court injunction and it's remains to be seen what the outcome for the CTA will be. But I do think there's a good chance it's going to be struck down. We just have to wait and see what happens with the court.
I totally agree with you. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for joining us. Amanda Dernovshek, she is associate with Foster Swift Collins and Smith with Lansing offices and also 5 others across the state of Michigan. Thanks for keeping us abreast.
Yep. Thanks, Chris.
All right, we'll be right back. You've been watching the Michigan Business Beat on the Michigan Business Network. I'm Chris Holman.